1914. After the outbreak of the First World War and the entry of the Ottoman Empire into the war on the side of the Central Powers, the Entente states began to actively attract Arab leaders to their side. In exchange for helping fight the Ottoman Empire, the Arab leaders were guaranteed that after the end of hostilities, their countries would gain independence. In 1917, after the Russian Empire had ceased to exist as a result of two revolutions, the Entente urgently needed a new ally, the role of which was perfectly suited to the United States. To encourage the American Jewish community to support U.S. entry into the war, and for a variety of additional reasons, on November 2, 1917, the British Empire issues the Balfour Declaration, according to which, after the end of the war, the Jews will be able to establish their own state in Palestine. It should be mentioned that the Arab leaders strongly opposed the Balfour Declaration, as it violated the promises given to them by the Entente. Nevertheless, after the end of the war, the British Empire received a mandate to govern Palestine and separated from it the formerly independent Emirate of Transjordan. The British fulfilled their promise given in the Balfour Declaration and Jewish settlers began to arrive in Palestine. The local Arab population, of course, did not like this, which is why an uprising broke out in Palestine in 1936. To try to resolve the conflict on November 11, 1936, a British Royal Commission arrived in Palestine, headed by Lord William Robert Peel. It should be mentioned that the Arabs agreed to stop boycotting the work of the Commission only after the British authorities reduced the quotas for Jewish migration from 4,500 to 1,800 people. Both sides tried with all their might to influence the work of the Commission so that it would make a decision that was beneficial to them. On July 7, 1937, the Commission finished its work and published its report, which stated that the conflict between the two peoples within the framework of a single state could not be resolved. The Commission proposed the creation of two states. Jewish, which was supposed to occupy 20% of the territory, and Arab, which was supposed to include the remaining territory with the exception of Jerusalem and Bethlehem, as well as a narrow corridor to the sea, which was supposed to remain under British control. The Commission also proposed to carry out an exchange of population, according to which 225,000 Arabs were to move to the territory of the Arab state, and 1,250 Jews to the territory of the Jewish state. Of course, the Arab leader did not like this option for resolving the conflict, and in July 1937 they rejected the plan proposed by the Commission. The Arab uprising resumed, but by September 1939, it was crushed by the efforts of the British authorities. The Second World War began, during which the British Empire, of course, could not be distracted by the solution of the Palestinian conflict. When the war ended, the British government handed over the solution of the Palestinian problem to the UN. On November 29, 1947, the UN General Assembly adopts a resolution according to which two states, Jewish and Arab, were to be created on the territory of Palestine. As for Jerusalem, it was supposed to remain under the control of UN forces. The Arab leaders refused to accept the UN decision and began demanding the creation of a unified state in Palestine. Since it was not possible to resolve the conflict peacefully, both sides began preparations for a forceful solution to the problem. By the beginning of the first serious hostilities, an army of the Holy War was formed with a total number of about 5,000 soldiers, which consisted of Palestinian Arabs. They were assisted by the Arab Liberation Army from neighboring Arab states, with a total number of about 6,000 soldiers, consisting of volunteers. It should be mentioned that there were serious contradictions between the leaders of the Holy War Army and the Arab Liberation Army, because of which these organizations practically did not interact with each other. The Arabs were opposed by Jewish paramilitary organizations, namely the Haganah, the Irgun and the Lehi, whose total number exceeded 20,000 soldiers. It should be mentioned that in the ranks of the mentioned paramilitary organizations there were soldiers who received military experience in the battles of the Second World War, which gave them a certain advantage. Almost immediately after the adoption of the UN resolution, hostilities began, which at the initial stage were of a local nature. The situation changed on March 10 when the Plan Dalet was adopted by the Jewish leadership, according to which the Haganah from a paramilitary organization was to be transformed into a regular army. This plan also provided for the establishment of control over the territories that were to become a Jewish state in accordance with the UN resolution, as well as the temporary occupation of Arab territories adjacent to Jewish settlements. In addition, it was proposed to quickly establish control over all military bases immediately after the British troops left them. By mid-April, Jewish detachments began active operations to implement the Plan Dalet. On April 16, 1948, the Haganah detachments attacked the city of Tiberias with a mixed population, which was located on the shores of Lake Tiberias. Jewish detachments began a massive mortar shelling of the Arab quarters, which lasted for several days. In turn, the Arabs turned to the British military for help, but they decided not to intervene. Understanding that help would not come, and on April 18, the Arab population, on the advice of the British military, decided to evacuate the city on their own with the attack of the Jewish detachments. Thus, Tiberias as well as nearby settlements came under the control of Jewish detachments. Also in April, armed skirmishes began between the Haganah and the Arab militia in the city of Haifa, which was the largest port in Palestine. The population of the city was also mixed, but even before the start of serious clashes, about 20,000 Arabs, including most of the financial elite, left Haifa, which left the local Arabs with virtually no leaders. Since the positions of the British troops were located between the Arab and Jewish regions, major clashes were avoided at the initial stage. The situation changed on April 21, when at dawn the British troops left their positions and withdrew to the port area. Immediately after this, a shootout broke out between the Arab and Jewish detachments. On the side of the Jewish detachments there was a numerical advantage, as well as the presence of heavy weapons in the form of mortars. Thus, by the morning of April 22, it became clear to the Arabs that they would not be able to repulse the attack of the Jewish detachments. After a powerful mortar attack, Jewish detachments attacked the Arab quarters of Haifa. Already at 4 p.m., the Arab population of Haifa began to evacuate the city. Meanwhile, on April 16, British troops left the city of Safed, which was home to about 2,400 Jews and 12,000 Arabs. Leaving the city, the British handed over control of the ruins of the Crusader fortress dominating the city to the Arabs, who in turn decided to use their numerical advantage to establish full control over the city. Not all Arab militias were armed, so their attack on the Jewish quarters was repulsed. Meanwhile, in the vicinity of the city, Jewish detachments approached, which in early May, having established control over 2 villages in the vicinity of Safed, cut off the connection between the Arab quarters of the city and Syria. Already on May 2, additional detachments, along with heavy weapons, were transferred to the Jewish quarters of Safed, after which a massive mortar shelling of the Arab quarters began. On May 6, under the cover of mortar fire, Jewish detachments attacked the Crusader fortress towering over the city. This attack was unsuccessful and the Jewish detachments, having suffered losses, were forced to retreat. On May 10, Jewish detachments launched a new attack, as a result of which they managed to establish control over the Crusader fortress, after which a mass exodus of the Arab population from the city began. On April 25, Bergen detachments attacked the city of Jaffa, which was located inside the territories allocated by the UN for the creation of a Jewish state, but at the same time was supposed to become part of an Arab state. Jewish detachments attacked the northern region of Jaffa, Manshia. The fighting continued for 3 days and ended with the retreat of the Arabs to the central part of the city. Already on April 28, the Arabs received reinforcements and made an attempt to recapture the lost area of the city. This attempt turned out to be unsuccessful, largely due to the massive mortar fire that the Jewish detachments conducted. Also, due to the massive mortar shelling, the Arab population of the city began to leave it. At this time, the British, who, due to inaction in April, seriously spoiled relations with the Arab countries, decided to intervene. After the Jewish detachments refused to stop the attack on Jaffa, British troops entered the city in late April and subjected the Jewish positions to heavy mortar fire. Already on May 1, a temporary truce was concluded between the Arab and Jewish forces. It should be mentioned that during the armistice, the local Arab population began to leave the city, despite the prohibition of the Arab Higher Committee. The truce lasted until May 13, when the British troops left their positions in Jaffa, after which Jewish detachments with a total number of about 5,000 soldiers attacked the city. Arab resistance was quickly broken and the city fell into the hands of Jewish troops. Located on the coast of the city of Acre, which, according to the UN plan, was to become part of the Arab state, was attacked by Jewish troops on April 26 almost immediately after the capture of Haifa, but after the intervention of British troops, they were forced to retreat. Despite this, the population of the city was demoralized by the influx of refugees from Haifa, as well as the flight of the military and civilian leadership. When the British military left the city on May 13, it was immediately attacked by Jewish troops. Having occupied the outskirts of the city on May 16, Jewish detachments began its artillery shelling. Already on the night of May 18, the city capitulated. On May 14, 1948, the British mandate for control of Palestine ended. On the same day, the independence of the State of Israel was proclaimed. Already on May 15, detachments of 5 Arab states, namely Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Jordan and Egypt, with a total number of about 54,000 soldiers, invaded the territory of Palestine. At the time of the invasion of the Arab troops, the total number of the Israeli army was about 45,000 soldiers, so the Israeli leadership hastily mobilized. On the very first day of the invasion, Tel Aviv, as well as Israeli military bases, were attacked by Egyptian aircraft, and the Egyptian ground forces launched an offensive in the area of Gaza City. As a result of the offensive, the Egyptian army managed to break the resistance of the Israeli troops to occupy the city of Ashdod on May 29. Taking advantage of the success, the Egyptians continued their offensive but were stopped 32 kilometers from Tel Aviv, as the Israeli troops managed to blow up the bridge in time. At the same time, the second grouping of the Egyptian army was advancing in a northeasterly direction. As a result of the offensive, she managed to cut off the Negev desert from the coast. The offensive of the Jordanian army began on the night of May 15 to 16. Jordanian detachments primarily focused on the capture of Jerusalem. By May 28, they managed to force the Israeli troops in the city center to capitulate, as well as cut the road linking Jerusalem with Tel Aviv. At the same time, the Jewish detachments, despite enemy attacks, managed to maintain control over western Jerusalem. The Jordanian army directed its efforts to occupy the western bank of the Jordan River, and with little or no resistance, successfully coped with this task. The Iraqi army invaded Palestinian territory on May 15 and began moving towards Kibbutz Gesher and the nearby Crusader fortress of Belvoir. Despite all the attempts made to storm the fortress and the kibbutz, the Iraqi troops failed, and on May 22 they crossed to the east bank of the Jordan River. On May 24, the Iraqi army crossed the river again and, having broken the resistance of the Jewish detachments, occupied the cities of Jenin, Tulkarm and Shechem. The Iraqi detachments continued their offensive towards the city of Netanya, but were stopped and driven back by the Israeli army. On June 1, 3 Israeli battalions launched a counterattack towards the city of Jenin, which was defended by only a few companies of Iraqi soldiers. The Israeli army managed to reach the center of the city during the assault, but at that moment its flank was attacked by the arriving Iraqi reinforcements. As a result of the counterattack of the Iraqi troops, the Israeli army was driven back from the city. The Syrian army also launched an offensive on May 15 and by May 18, it managed to establish control over the village of Tsemek and the surrounding settlements. Already by the beginning of June, due to a lack of ammunition, the Syrians had to retreat, leaving the previously occupied territories. Regrouping, the Syrian detachments launched an offensive north of Lake Tiberias and, after heavy fighting, established control over Kibbutz Mishmar Hayarden. As for the Lebanese group, it was small in number. For this reason, the Israeli army managed to successfully repulse all its attacks and then transfer part of its forces to the Jerusalem front. At that time, the Lebanese detachments regrouped and, as a result of a swift assault, occupied the city of Malkiah. Continuing the offensive, they established control over the central Galilee, which was inhabited by Arabs. It should be mentioned that the Arab armies practically did not interact with each other, due to the lack of trust between the leaders of the Arab states. As early as June 1, several Israeli aircraft that had recently been received from Europe attacked the city of Amman, where a meeting of the leaders of the Arab League was taking place. In response to this, Egyptian aircraft bombed Tel Aviv on June 3. On June 11, 1948, Count Folke Bernadotte, who was appointed by the UN as a mediator, managed to persuade the parties to the conflict to conclude a truce for 1 month. During this time, the Israeli army managed to obtain a significant amount of heavy weapons such as Hotchkiss and Sherman tanks, as well as 6-inch mortars. In addition, Israeli aviation has significantly increased, thanks to the supply of Messerschmitts and Mustangs. As for the Arab armies, during the armistice they managed to obtain only additional small arms, as well as artillery ammunition from British military bases. Also, during the ceasefire, the number of opposing armies increased, and more than 4,000 veterans of the Second World War arrived in the Israeli army, which significantly increased its combat capabilities. The truce expired on July 9, but 36 hours before the appointed date, the Egyptian army went on the offensive. Israeli detachments also switched to active operations. Thanks to the weapons they received, they managed to restore contact with the Negev desert, as well as disrupt communications between Arab troops in Gaza and Judea. Rapidly advancing, the Israeli army managed to oust the Jordanian troops from the cities of Lydda and Ramla. Thus, the largest airport in Palestine, which was located near the city of Lydda, fell into the hands of the Israeli army. In the north, the counteroffensive of the Israeli army was also quite successful. She managed to oust the Arab troops from the lower Galilee, and also to establish control over the city of Nazareth. On July 18, a truce was again concluded between the parties to the conflict. This truce lasted until October 15, when the Israeli army continued its offensive. With the mediation of the UN on October 22, another truce was concluded, which, however, did not last long. By the end of the year, hostilities resumed. The Israeli army, which by this time had about 115,000 soldiers at its disposal, took advantage of its numerical advantage over the enemy, as well as the advantage in heavy weapons, and launched a new counteroffensive. She managed to push the Lebanese detachments into Lebanese territory and defeat them. In the south, as a result of a swift attack, Israeli troops managed to establish control over the city of El Arish, which created a threat of encirclement of the Egyptian army in Palestine. In the center, Israeli detachments managed to push back the Jordanian troops to unblock the road to East Jerusalem. At the beginning of 1949, under the auspices of the UN, negotiations took place between Israel and the Arab states, except for Iraq, which refused to participate in the negotiations. As a result of negotiations on February 24, a ceasefire agreement was concluded between Israel and Egypt. A similar agreement was concluded with Lebanon on March 23, and on April 3 and July 20 with Transjordan and Syria. This ended the war. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so as not to miss new videos.